I never planned to spend my life here. Years ago, when I slipped out of the city with a duffel, I told myself it was temporary, 2 seasons at most. I was running from the usual things men run from: debts with names, trouble with badges, faces that wanted me gone. I pictured a year tucked under pines, then a bus back into noise and neon when the heat cooled. But the forest does not count the way we count. It doesn't tally by bills or birthdays. It marks time by how the shadows lengthen, by how the bark swallows a nail, by which birds return and which don't. 1 year, then another, then 10. When I finally looked up, the forest had swallowed me without malice. The way a bog accepts fallen leaves, one more layer. Weightless, inevitable. At first, I kept a string to the world. I'd walk the service road into a small town, buy cheap groceries, sit in the library, and pretend the hum of the fluorescents was the sound of civilization. In those days, I still believed I belonged to the city, that my absence was a trick of lighting, not a fact. But trips thinned, then stopped. I learned the names of wind. I learned soil by smell. I learned that the forest forgives clumsy youth, but never forgets a sin. Here, everything is alive. Everything remembers. And there are rules unwritten, rude as truth, that you either learn or you die learning. I'll tell you what the forest taught me, not because I think you'll listen, but because I want you to understand what it means to belong to a place that does not, in any way, belong to you. Rule 1. Find your shelter wisely. Not all green is welcome. Some groves hold their breath when you enter. Some clearings fill your mouth with the taste of iron. You'll feel it if you allow yourself the humiliation of feeling. When I was new, I slept where exhaustion dropped me, under a leaning birch, against a boulder warmed by afternoon sun, beside the sweet scum of a lake. I'd grown up in rooms with corners, in hallways with exits. A patch of grass felt like freedom. One cold night I laid my bedroll near a lakeshore that shone like slate. The air there was colder than the rest, as if the woods had a fever, and this was the cooling cloth, and it slid under my jacket like a bad idea. Some time before dawn, I woke to a noise like a gunshot and the hot breath of bark. A limb as thick as my thigh drove into the soil, inches from my skull, burying itself spear deep. The ground shuddered around it. I didn't move for a long time, because sudden movement felt like an answer to a question I didn't want to hear. You'll say, accident. Maybe you'll be right in places that forgive you. Here, accidents have memories. There are places where men were hanged and where men hanged themselves, and the difference matters less than you think. There are spots where a truck slid one winter and never got pulled out. There are logs that have watched too much. The ground holds a film of every drop of blood. Sleep in those places, and the forest will try to finish what was started. How do you choose? Watch the animals. If deer step through a gap with their heads low and without haste, if wrens stitch a sound at the edge of a thicket, if ants haggle over a dead moth without breaking formation, build there. If the air feels oddly heavy, if the ferns lie flat without wind, if no spider bothers to string a line between 2 points, keep moving. A good site feels like a held breath slowly let go. I built my first real shelter in a sun-drunk clearing, where a rib of granite lay close to the surface. The ground there had a spring to it, not sponge-soft but buoyant, as if the earth were willing to share one small comfort. I cut deadfall and set log against log, chinked with clay and dried grass, roofed it with cedar boughs first, and later with the tough hide of bark, shaved thin as shingles. The door I made stout, not because of bears, you can bargain with bears by being uninteresting, but because of everything that is not a bear and cares nothing for your size. Remember this: a tree is a road. You might admire the view from a platform lashed to a trunk. You might like the safety of height. Don't. I've heard claws in the canopy at midnight, the true sound of weight-finding bark. I've listened to something descend slow, savoring each roughness. Once, something fell from above, not from wind, and hit the ground with the heavy wet sound of a sack of meat. What rose up afterward breathed like a man does when he doesn't want to be heard. Morning light showed prints in the duff that tried to be human. The heel true enough, the arch wrong, each toe ending in a hook that carved the earth like punctuation. A low house teaches humility. It also keeps you alive. Rule 2. Build strong or be taken. A scrap shelter will take you through a kind night. The forest is kind fewer nights than you think. When I first came here, I thought any roof was enough. A lean-to of branches, a plastic tarp strung between trees, even a hammock. They worked until the first hard rain, until the first black night when the woods pressed close, and I learned that walls aren't just for weather, they are for keeping something out. I built in desperation at first. A shack of pine logs balanced more than stacked. Mud daubed between the gaps, smoke curling through holes in the roof. But the forest doesn't forgive sloppiness. That first winter, the walls bowed in the snow, and a wind whistled through every crack, carrying with it whispers that moved differently from the storm. I swore I heard knuckles tapping on the wall, searching for a hollow. It took me years to understand that the shelter itself must be alive. Not alive like the forest, no, that is too vast, too old, but alive in the way a weapon is alive when you grip it with fear. So I dug. Not a grave, though it felt like one at times, but a shallow pit where the walls could sink their weight. I interlocked logs into corners, cut grooves so the beams clasped each other like fingers. I laid slats on the earth to float a floor above the damp, and I pitched the roof steep for snow and rain. The door was heavy, hung on leather hinges, with a latch simple enough to work by touch, but clever enough to confound whatever hand might grope at it in the dark. The house breathed with me. Its timbers creaked like bones, but they held, and I thought myself safe. Until the storm. It was the 5th winter when it came. Storms here always come from the west, but this one rose from the east, dragging the smell of the sea into a land that had never known salt. The wind carried claws. It raked across the walls, testing them, pulling at the seams like a dentist prying teeth from a jaw. The whole shelter shuddered. Dust fell in waves from the ceiling. And then something heavier than the storm stepped close. I didn't hear it walk. I felt the ground bend under its weight. Meltwater dripped onto the lintel, as if from the hide of some beast that had dragged winter itself upon its back. I pressed my spine to the door. The wood bulged inward with every breath of the thing outside. And then came the laugh. Not human, not beast. A sound made from air startled between shapes. A laugh that had never known lungs or throat. The latch quivered. The hinges groaned. For hours, I swear it was hours, it pressed, clawed, tested. But the walls held. The roof held. The door did not break. When dawn came, the storm had gone. My door bore deep scratches, long and deliberate, as if something had signed its name there. The forest had tested me, and my house had answered back. That was when I learned, build strong or be taken. The weak shelters aren't simply destroyed, they vanish. You return to find nothing, no tarp, no rope, no ash of a fire, only footprints, pressed too deep, circling where you once lay. And if you build above the ground, in the branches of trees, then you are already dead. The canopy is not ours. I've heard claws dragging down trunks at night, the slow spiral of something descending. I've seen the marks where a body hit the earth with no sound of bone, only a wet sigh, as if the forest exhaled it. My house stands because it is part of the ground, part of the pattern. Every wall a prayer, every log a pact. Which brings me to the next lesson, because even strong walls are only half the battle. Strength protects you from the storm, but not from what the storm brings with it. You must defend your home with something the forest cannot swallow. Rule 3. Protect your shelter with faith. Believe in God, or gods, or the square geometry of your father's carpenter's level. Believe in what the wind does to the cattails. It doesn't matter what you choose. It matters that you choose. Without a boundary, the forest will run a route through you and drink you like water. Above my door hangs a wooden cross. I carved it from a branch that hadn't fallen yet, a living thing persuaded into symbol. It's not the cross itself, if you're the arguing kind. It's the idea of not opening. Storm nights are louder than a city if you've earned the right to hear them. The rain comes in sheets. The trees knock heads like brawlers. Voices arrive within that noise and pretend to be part of it, children laughing in the rhythm of the gusts, an old woman gossiping in the rattle of twigs, men at the edge of a joke they never get around to finishing. You'll hear your name in there, clipped clean and pronounced correctly by a mouth that could not have known it before the day you walked under these branches. Do not lift the latch. I have pressed my ear to the door and felt heat where a face would be if a face had the courtesy of being human. It waits for the courtesy of your curiosity. It loves a polite man. Faith is a wall you can lean your back against without turning to see what you're defying. Rule 4. Do not harm the forest needlessly. The forest has patience with clumsiness. It has none with contempt. The first winter, I burned an old stump punky but dry enough to keep the early dark at bay while I learned the night's grammar. In the morning, my walls wore messages, 4 long scratches over the doorway, deep enough to show sap, each stroke parallel as if the hand that made them had measured. Inside, my gear hadn't moved. My food sack still hung. The marks were not theft. They were instruction. Since then, I take deadfall first and live wood last. I ask with my hand before I cut, the way you test a sleeping child's forehead. If you don't believe that matters, try it both ways, and see which night fills with kindness and which with fetched noises. Hunt when you're hungry, fish when the lake offers. If you take more than stillness allows, the balance will be restored with or without your consent. Once, in the 7th year, men came with the bright vests of permission and the swagger of people whose trucks idle while they talk. They cut saplings to clear a view they did not earn. They left a pile of cans by a stump and laughed like boys. I watched from behind a hemlock and felt nothing noble. At dawn the next day, their camp was in order, except for one detail. Their rifles lay 30 paces away, each barrel bent like a question mark. No prince led to them. No prince led away. The men left with their voices pitched higher than the day before. One of them returned a week later to look for his grandfather's knife. He did not find it. He did find his name carved into the birch beside his old fire ring in a hand that approximated script the way a child approximates a drawing of a hand. Do with that what you like. Rule 5. Listen to the forest and to your own heart. The forest talks. You will learn the difference between noise and news. Your heart talks too. It begins modestly, a tightening under the breastbone, a narrowing of the ribs. You will try to call it anxiety, hunger, weather. Eventually, you will name it what it is: instruction. I have turned back half a mile from a patch of chanterelles so bright they looked painted, because the air there went muddy and still, and the fine hairs in my ears insisted. 2 days later, I passed that same slope and found a moose laid open like a lesson, ribs white as driftwood, the belly a theater of flies. There was no drag mark. Whatever feasted did it, standing and left without tidying. Another time, the forest pulled me, not pushed, toward a clearing I'd noticed before and avoided. The center held an ancient wooden cross, leaned by its own age into humility. Around it, rags of clothing decayed into the same color as leaves. Bones lay the way old bones lie, surrendered. There are places here where grief has been baked into the dirt, so long it tastes sweet. This was one. I slept there without a dream. The night held me like a palm holds a coin. In the morning, the dew on the grass arranged itself into 3 perfect lines across the doorway of my shelter that didn't exist the day before. No animal made them. They looked like writing in a language that admired ours enough to imitate. Listening is 2 acts. Hear the world, hear yourself. If you neglect either, you become food. Rule 6. Keep a boundary of light. Darkness is not the enemy, it is the medium. But a line helps. I keep an ember alive even on calm nights. I bank the coals beneath a crust of ash so the glow persists without boasting. The little circle of red is not about warmth, it is about an agreement. Things that prefer night respect a border more when you respect it first. A fire that roars declares war. A fire that dies declares surrender. The ember says, I know you, the way a dog nods at a cat and goes back to sleeping. If wind dies all at once and your ember refuses to answer your breath, do not coax. Something is kneeling on the other side, watching your patience. Let the night go unlit. Be smaller than you wish. Morning will return like forgiveness. Rule 7. Do not answer your name after dusk. You'll hear it. It will be your voice the first time, and then your mother's. Then the girl whose ring you pawned. Then the cop who taught you the difference between warning and promise. They will stand just beyond the boughs, in that weird distance where a body could be, where a hand could be, where you could be wrong. Do not answer. Do not speak. Names are leashes if you let them. I broke this rule once. I tell you this so you understand the cost, not because confession lightens it. It was deep night. My fire was a rumor under ash. Rain had stopped but left its weight on everything. The forest's noise had gone thin, the way sound thins after a chapel empties. Then I heard it my name, spoken in a voice shaped exactly like mine but pulled lengthwise. The syllables stretched like a taffy until they shone. It came from the left, where the alder thicket paddles the wind like an oar. The voice was patient, polite. It said my name the way you might say, "Excuse me," to someone blocking a grocery aisle. I said, "What?" Because a lifetime of social reflex is hard to unlearn. The trees parted as if the path were a coat, and someone's hand slid down the zipper. I saw myself. Same jaw. Same broken tooth from a bar fight, I tell differently now. Same knife scar along the wrist. White as chalk. The eyes, no. Not eyes. The places eyes should have been were hollows, full of black shine like the inside of a well. My face smiled at me. It didn't know how to stop smiling, the way a mask doesn't know. Every part of me went animal. I ran blind and broke 2 toes on the doorframe and didn't notice until morning. I ran like the ground was not accountable. I slept under a root 20 yards from my own house because turning the latch felt like a ritual that would end with my hand taken off at the wrist. When I dared to creep back at dawn, my door stood open on its leather hinges, the latch raised in a neat angle. Inside, nothing had moved. On the table lay my cross. The nail I had hung it from was bent upward, like a finger had toyed with it and got bored. I have never answered my name at night since. If the forest wants me, it will not need manners. It will take me the way winter takes water, by asking and asking until the shape changes. Rule 8. Leave offerings and keep your word. The forest doesn't want worship. It isn't a god with a calendar, but it recognizes recognition. Once a week, my week, not its I leave a little salt, or bread if I've traded for it, or fish skin crisped on the coals on a stump I've come to think of as a ledger. I do not ask for anything. I set it down and say thank you aloud like a child. If I promise a thing, I'll replant here. I'll mend this fence for the woman downriver. I'll leave this spot clean for the next feet. I do it. The forest does not mind a thief so much as a liar. Theft can be repaid. Lies leak. Once I took honey from a wild hive after a lean spring because it felt like justice. The bees had more than me, and I had more need than them. I left twice as much dried fish 2 days later and hung my canteen from a peg by the hive for travelers. The next storm blew straight past my roofline, as if pushed. That is what I mean. Not bargains, balances. The difference is the only arithmetic the forest respects. The rule I broke, and what it showed me. You already know, I answered. I saw my death wearing my face. It was not dramatic. No antlers, no glamour, no velvet darkness swallowing the house. Just me without eyes, and a smile that had learned to be a cut. It is one thing to imagine your end as a tide. It is another to watch it step out from between two alders and tilt its head the way you tilt yours when you're pretending not to be tired. I lived because my body did the smart thing before my mind did. I will not live forever. I am not owed more reprieves. Since that night, I have become smaller in the right ways. I eat the lean parts of the fish, and I say the name of the fish in my head like a prayer. I step around mushrooms I cannot name, and leave the ones I can if the place feels thin. I look at my door before I sleep to confirm the cross hasn't grown bored of me. Sometimes in deep winter, when the moon makes the snow into salt, I walk to the ledger stump and set down a little of what I have and a little of what I wish I had, side by side. The forest does not need either. I do. You might say I'm a mad old man talking to trees because I ran out of people to talk to. That's fair. You might say the stories are stories. That's fair too. The forest doesn't care which mercy you extend yourself. Here is the truth that doesn't require your belief. The forest existed before your arguments and will exist after your bones are the softest part of a hillside. If you come to take pictures, antlers, quiet, you will be taken in your turn. If you come to bow your head a little and keep your promises and leave as lightly as you can, the forest may let you live out your days with your hands still your own. Do not mistake survival for safety. Safety is for rooms with corners. Survival is a conversation you have to keep having. The forest is always hungry, but hunger is not hate. It eats what stops moving. And sometimes it chooses who stays, not as a favor, but as a fact. If it chooses you, you will know by how your footsteps begin to sound like part of the place, by how the deer stop startling, by how the wind says your name without asking anything of you. On those days you will feel almost welcome. On those days, thank it. On all the other days, remember the rules. And when night lays its hand across the trees like a blessing, that forgot how to be blessing, do not lift the latch.